Hey there, White Sox fans. Guess what? It is time for the wrap up finale of our end of season 2022 White Sox minor league affiliate rundowns. And, listen, we saved the best for last. We picked the one
Yeah.
team that finished 30th among 30 teams, the team closest to the major leagues, which tells you a lot about the type of reinforcements the White Sox have been able to benefit from, although not all bad. We'll probably touch on that a little bit. It's the Charlotte Knights, and with me, as always, my very best friend in the entire world, it is Darren Black, our tireless minor league baseball writer for Southside Sox. And Lord knows if the man looks a little drained in his Cedar Rapids Colonels hat, hey, he chose the Twins affiliate to wear for this one. There's some hidden meaning there. Don't know what it is. Maybe he can explain himself. But if he looks a little drained, it's because he has had to cover, what is it, 3 days a week, and wrap ups and weeklies and monthlies and occasional podcasts. Listen, just give the guy a break. I'm not going to give him a break the whole postseason. We got things to talk about in the postseason or off season, but maybe at least for say a week, we're just going to let him sleep because this nonsense has to take a lot out of anyone. So, Darren, thank you for actually staying up, having the strength to sit and try to talk for about 20 minutes about the Charlotte Knights with me.
Yeah, we'll go straight into the last season review to the first season preview.
Look at that.
We're still doing it.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. If you think you can get away, we'll explain a little bit of how we'll cover the Arizona Fall League toward the end. Darren is previewing our second half of the podcast. Let's get right to
So
it.
excited.
Yeah, exactly. You cannot contain yourself. Okay, the usual numbers wrap up. If I didn't already preview it for you, the Charlotte Knights, a professional AAA baseball team, finished 58 and 92. If I recall correctly, they had crawled to within 58 and 88 within that 30 game under 500 mark before eventually falling in fantastic fashion to, I believe, the Durham Bulls, who were the first place in their division. The Charlotte Knights finished 10 of 10 teams. Of course, they're the worst in all of AAA, so clearly this is not going to come as a shock. 10th in their division, very worst in the International League, so that would make them 20th in the International League and among all of AAA. 30th. They're 28 games out of first place and minus 224 run differential, which I've been told is not good. It's just an awful team. And I guess we can talk about how that relates to the White Sox a little bit. Is part of the reason this team is so awful because the White Sox are cannibalizing the Charlotte Knights? Of course, every major league team does that to a degree. So it really comes down to the Charlotte Knights being as good a representative of the lack of depth the White Sox have in their system as any other team.
Yeah, especially just on the pitching side, or the starting pitching side. They barely had anybody there by the end of the season, and it wasn't even because their starting pitchers that they started with to begin the season were, deserving of it, or even more deserving of it because they got to the majors. Davis Martin finished with the fourth most starts, 13, and he started in Birmingham and is ending in with the
I
White
was
Sox.
I was
So
just gonna say, Darren. I mean, the starters, the rotation's so bad in Charlotte, they couldn't even call up a guy from Charlotte to take a
yeah,
spot for the White Sox. They had to call a guy from Birmingham.
yeah, it was not great. But I mean, they were a kind of a feeder team to an extent. Jimmy Lambert did start there after coming off of a year in an offseason rehabbing. Gavin Sheets started there. Jake Berger didn't exactly start there, but ended there before he got hurt. Romy Gonzalez just was hurt the entire year, then came up eventually to be there.
Right.
And then Sevi Zavala legitimately became a key piece for the White Sox after kind of proving it that he was back with the bat this year with Charlotte. But just a really just other than that, just the top end depth is not here in Charlotte, and not sure when it will be again because we can debate if they really care about Charlotte now that everything seems to be going to Birmingham. But at this point, they don't have they don't have a representative AAA team.
Yeah, and they don't really have top end depth. But Darren, I'm going to ask you about three guys who played primarily in Charlotte, who I think qualify, and they are the guys you covered hitting wise in the accompanying wrap up. Right, like if people actually don't want to just listen or watch this podcast, they can actually read your words, where you're going to go in a lot more depth, and you're able to hear about these guys. But certainly three guys stood out. I don't think anybody really ended up being a disappointment per se. I don't know if we'd still call them top end depth, including, and let's start with the top catching prospect. Sorry, Sebi Zavala, top catching prospect in the organization, which of course is damning with faint praise because there really still are pretty much no catchers in the system. But that's Carlos Pérez, who seems to maintain at least adequate, if not average to maybe plus, let's call it average, you can correct me, defense, and a guy who actually had some pop. I want to say the White Sox had maybe 3 to 4 guys with 20 home runs in the system. He's one of them. He may be leading the system, I'm not sure, but he's one of those guys, and that's pop that we weren't expecting from Carlos. So he's a guy who might be actually a legitimate major leaguer, at least a bench role player.
Yeah, he did see some time with the Sox just because of a 40-man roster crunch this time around. So I mean, he is going to be one of the, I assume, 3 catchers heading in the year that's on a 40-man spot. So he should be the first guy up when they need help. And what he does is he basically just hits the ball. A lot of the times this year in Charlotte, it was pretty far. Though I don't know how much of it was just being in Charlotte, like a really homer-friendly park.
Yeah.
But he did still show some decent pop in Birmingham, which is not a homer-friendly park. So just kind of got to take the average of that ISO, basically, and then maybe that's what his true power is. But he doesn't strike out a ton. I think to start the season, he didn't strike out for, I think, about a week or so, which was just of all the streaks the White Sox minor league ball players had this year, that was definitely one of the more interesting ones. But he doesn't walk a ton either, so there's a lot of balls in play.
Mm-hmm.
The unfortunate thing with him is, he's a catcher. They're all pretty slow. And I know, saying like us watching Yasmani Grandal run, like we understand how slow they can be, but Carlos Pérez is still pretty slow. He hits a lot of balls on the ground as well. So he has a pretty low BABIP, 234 last year. So if you're hitting a lot of grounders, pretty decent homers, but you're still hitting a ton of balls in play, like you probably just need to get some more line drives in there, even if it does take away from some homers to doubles, that would probably end up being better in his case. But yeah, he's like how we all watch Zach Collins and Sebi Zavala. He is an actual better defensive catcher than he is a hitting prospect as a catcher. So that is kind of, I guess, refreshing, if that's what you want to kind of term it. But
Right.
yeah, that he is a legitimate third option as a catcher in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So just after a year in off season of saying where are the backup catchers, now you kind of look at a third guy and say, like, okay, that's like, it's not, awesome, but catching nowadays is not a premium position for any reason, unless you're the Orioles, who have probably the next best thing with Adley Rutschman.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a nice surprise this year.
Yeah. Yeah, well, this was not an expected outcome. The White Sox have been scraping for catchers for, gosh, as long as maybe even I've been alive, much less Darren. So it's certainly something to be said that now there are 2 legitimate backups, given the fact that it does seem like it's going to be just a fact that Yasmani Grandal is going to routinely break down during the courses of seasons. Okay, we got a couple more guys to cover. So let's talk about the one who's a little bit more exciting, who really was, I think, almost far and away the minor league player of the year, the most exciting guy, at least until Oscar Colas decided to sort of like steal all the thunder at the end of the season. And that's Lenyn Sosa, who made this stratospheric climb from Birmingham, just want the hell out of the ball in Birmingham, then sort of didn't stop in Charlotte, had enough of a call up there where just enough for us to start clamoring for him to be in Chicago. He did get to Chicago and just did what you'd expect, which was really not much. A guy was sort of a little bit underwater at that point, but then went back down to Charlotte. And how would you assess his 2022, given that? I mean, I guess
Yeah.
We know
Yeah,
what
I
his
know.
trajectory was. Did it
Yeah.
turn out to be the good season that it started as?
Oh yeah. It started outrageous. It ended pretty well.
Mm.
The middle of it, maybe not middle of it, but like a quarter of it, right there in the middle of the season just was not, fantastic. As you know, a lot of people probably didn't watch Birmingham games or Charlotte games, and so you just watched Lenyn Sosa play baseball.
Mm.
And you could tell that you could tell he was not ready to go
Right.
see Major League pitching, going
Yeah.
up straight from Double A to there.
Yeah.
Um, his first stint with the Sox, negative WRC plus. His second one, it was positive, was still like in the teens. So it wasn't a great start.
Yeah.
But he did end the year much better in Charlotte, much closer to what he was doing in Birmingham. Like the power was back, the walks were up. He hasn't really been a strikeout guy ever, but they were in the middle teens again, which was similar to his Double A stint this year. And I mean, we've talked about him in previous podcasts about how he hadn't really had a great offensive season in his
Hmm.
professional career before, and in a year where he went to Double A and Triple A and Major League Baseball, that was the year that he had his first great like offensive surge. So that's
Yeah.
good for him. He's going to be in the running if there's no additions to second base. However, they make additions, free agency trade. He's going to be one of the options at second base next year in opening day. That's probably not the best solution right now, but if the off season goes how most people expect, he will be in the running um,
Yeah.
at second base. And he's already on the clock. He's done an option. So if you don't want to burn another one for starting, a new year, then have at it. But he's got more potential than probably anybody else that's close to the majors on their side. And then it's Jose Rodriguez behind him, but
Oh,
not sure Rodriguez is necessarily ready for
all
that
right.
run.
And let me sort of related, and this is a question I wanted to hit you with next, because the trajectory of Sosa seems very similar to a guy a year ago, though a very different player, and that's Romy Gonzalez. Romy Gonzalez, of course, is up playing second base due to Tim
Yeah,
Anderson injury and so
and
forth, and
everywhere.
he's whatever acquitting himself well enough. Given that the trajectories are somewhat similar, and I guess similarly surprising. How do those two compare? We know that Aromi's he's an older player. He's played more all around the field. He's I don't know, more of a Swiss Army knife type of guy. Being older, I
Yeah.
imagine he has less ceiling. But how would you compare just those two, given that they had his 2021 was sort of Sosa's 2022?
Yeah, so Romy, the pluses on Romy's side is the versatility there. And he has unbelievable power that Sosa will never match.
Mm.
The other side of that is Lenyn Sosa cannot play everywhere, but he is a better defensive second
Yeah.
baseman and shortstop. I'm sure Romy is a much better outfielder, just for the
Right.
simple reason that Sosa has not played out there. But Sosa, I mean, at least this year, just showed a much better bat overall. He's not a guy that strikes out a ton like Gonzalez has. Even when in his fantastic year last year, he did strike out a lot, and that was a concern. But he also walked a ton.
Mm.
Lenyn Sosa has relied on BABIP for a while, and that skyrocketed this year as well. So I think just kind of if you're looking for someone's major league ceiling, I guess Sosa would probably be the guy there, just because he just needs to keep doing what he did this year.
Mm.
Romy Gonzalez needs to fix a problem with his strikeouts that has been apparent since they've
Right.
drafted him. Um, but they're still, I mean, they're both going to be on the White Sox at some point next year. I know a lot of people assumed Gonzalez would be the Leury Garcia replacement. And obviously he's better than that right now. But it just depends on, on a bunch of factors with Larry and if Romy Gonzalez is going to be healthy next season, because he also has a bit of an injury bug.
Mm.
Just kind of depends on a lot. But if you're gonna take a guy and say, hey, I want him to play every day because he has a higher ceiling, I'd probably go Sosa just
Mhm.
after this kind of breakout power
Yeah.
surge
Yeah.
with decrease in strikeouts.
You can't be blamed, Darren, for thinking the White Sox wouldn't have, say, committed 3 years to Leury Garcia. So,
Yeah.
to be a little
Now
bit
is that
thrown.
a left field?
Yeah. Okay, now let's take a look at a guy who you might have considered to be very similar, well, actually superior to Lenyn Sosa going into the season. The guy you would have thought would have been the first, very likely the first call up to AAA and to the majors, and that's the bonus baby, the guy with the Gold Glove, and that's Yolbert Sánchez, who seems like he definitely did not have the Lenyn Sosa season, and in fact, you might argue that his year was a disappointment. Give me an assessment of where he's at, and including what his trajectory for the majors, might be. Or is he just going to get past because now you got Jose Rodriguez who's going to be coming, and he could easily get buried in the middle infield depth. Not that the White Sox have just
Oh yeah.
plum players everywhere, but you get buried, you get buried.
Yeah, Sanchez is definitely getting buried at this point, because you do have 40-man spots there right now with Romy Gonzalez and Lenyn Sosa that have more potential.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Jose Rodriguez right behind him. In terms of just because Rodriguez is at AA and Sanchez played majority at AAA, not in terms of skill at all. So yeah, that's kind of where he's at right now. I think most people just kind of expected him, like myself, that he would be a utility infielder, basically second, third, short, show good defense and be a bench guy. And I mean that's basically what he's continuing to show. But
Mm-hmm.
there's actually been some surprises, and Jose Rodriguez is continuing to do his thing in Birmingham. So I mean, Sanchez, he continues to show the things that he's good at.
Yeah.
Doesn't strike out a ton. Has good bat to ball skills. It's literally only singles, and that's not gonna cut it in today's Major League Baseball. A 282 average looks great, but with no power and a low
Yeah.
walk rate, that's
Yeah.
an 81 WRC plus, which is not good
Yeah.
in Charlotte. So if you're not hitting for power in Charlotte, that's a pretty big problem.
Yeah, Darren, let me just cut in and say the thing that shocked us about Yolbert last year is that suddenly in one of what you'd think would be the toughest affiliate to start breaking out offensively, it seemed like he discovered his bat and maybe got lost again this year. Do we know what happened there? Is this just what he is and he just had a strange sort of second half of 2021?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, when you put all of that together, it still wasn't a high ISO. He probably just ended the season just a bit better because I mean, again, he is an older player for
Right.
basically any level he's been at up until AAA. He's been an older player,
Mhm.
and he did play professionally before this.
Yeah.
So he's just more experienced, knows what to do. But yeah, I mean, basically he kind of just plateaued once he got to AAA. Um, the power under 100 ISO is not, not very good.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't want to give too much of a preview of the rest of this podcast, but we pretty much just covered it. We are still going to talk about the Charlotte Knights. We have no choice. We still got time on the clock, and we do have to sell some things on behalf of SB Nation. So please, really, given the fact that you are listening to a podcast about a 58 and 92 AAA team that was 30th in all of AAA baseball, that's 30 out of 30 teams. Probably every one of you listening need to buy whatever weird ass product that the SB Nation of Ox is trying to sell you here, because I'm guessing it's just a handful of folks. I hope there's a ton of you, but it might just be a handful of folks. If that's the case, you really need to get out there and buy. I don't know what it is. I don't pick these things, but please listen very carefully. Click yes, yes, go, 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 buy, buy, buy. And we'll see you in a minute, and we'll find some other Charlotte Knights to talk about because we sort of have to. Talk to you again in a minute. Hey, White Sox fans, you lucky, lucky people are listening to a podcast about the Charlotte Knights. And I think it's already been clear if you listen to the first half. I'm not sure how you skipped to the second half. So if you listen to the first half, you know that this team was really, really bad. And let's just broaden it and say that the White Sox entire affiliate system was the worst in baseball this year. And that is piled on top of likely being the worst last year. I know they had teams, even though Birmingham was above 500, they had at least one team that was the worst in their entire level, and another, I want to say Kannapolis wasn't quite the worst, but they had to be like second to worst. So this could be 2 years in a row the White Sox have the worst record in all minor league baseball. We know for a fact in 2022 they were the worst, and the only team above 500, barely so, was the Dominican Summer League team, which essentially sort of doesn't count. Okay, I've tried to just blab about stuff. I have nothing to do about the players in the Charlotte Knights. Apologies to all the Charlotte Knights, because we love you. Love Laura Wolf shooting those great photos for us. But we have to talk about a pitcher, maybe. Obviously, we've already decimated the starters because there really are no, essentially, really there are no starters. At times, they probably were running out one actual starter every rotation round, which is ludicrous, and it really is a dereliction of duty on behalf, or certainly on the part of maybe not Chris Getz, certainly Rick Hahn, to not even stock the Johnny Cuetos of the world, who are ready to come up, as that seventh starter, instead of forcing maybe the decision between John Park or going down to Davis Martin at Double-A, or who knows who at High A. I don't know what they're planning on doing in the future, because they're not going to be able to restock this system's arms in a second. And I'm going to try really hard not to get into a sidebar about Carlos Rodon, Darren. Okay, let's talk about one guy who might have legitimate, I guess, maybe you chose to write about him, so I guess he has legitimate major league potential. Now it seems like in the bullpen, and that is the big hoss. It's Kade McClure, who seems like he had a decent campaign being switched to relief. If not Cade, you got to give me a name of someone who could possibly get into a major league bullpen on merit. But it does seem like Cade is a guy that the White Sox might be hanging some hopes on.
Yeah, I mean, just based on last year, the only guy that would merit that probably is Kade McClure, that mostly played in Charlotte. He again started in Birmingham, was a starting pitcher. I think he started like 6-7 games, like actual, like not just going an inning and then getting pulled. He was going 4 or 5 unless he got roughed up. And then they kept doing it for a little while after that, but not starting. He would go in like the third, something like that, pitch the next 3-4. And then they slowly kind of made him an actual reliever, and he was much better as in his role as kind of a more pure reliever. I kind of put the date of May 24th as kind of the basic switch, because he didn't pitch more than 3 innings at any point after that, and he pitched more than 3 innings. Obviously, he was starting like several times before that. And he ended the year with a 3.50 ERA, 31% K rate, just under 7% walk rate, just based off of that. And he steadily improved as the year went on. The homers went down as the year went on. The batting average against slowly went down, and there was no real increase in walks, which is pretty good to see from any pitcher as the season goes on, especially from a younger guy like Kade McClure. And the strikeouts still stayed right above 30%. I'm not saying that he is, the next Jimmy Lambert or anything like that, but if you're looking for a guy that went from being a starter and then went to a reliever, which is something the White Sox have done frequently. They're in their bullpen right now pretty frequently. 3 of them were in their bullpen this year: Tanner Banks, Reynaldo Lopez, Jimmy Lambert. All did really well moving into a relief role. And they kind of seem to do it with Kade McClure, and it actually worked out with him. Doesn't work out with everybody, but he ended the year pretty strong. And another guy we'll talk about, Jason B. I hope they do that with him, just move him straight to the bullpen, see what they have. But pleasantly surprised that that was his end of the season. Just hope he can stick with it. Hope the White Sox stick with him as a reliever, even though they do need starting pitching from somewhere. But he seemed to be a much better reliever than he was starting pitcher in the higher levels.
Yeah, and don't forget, it wasn't done in the White Sox system, but Liam Hendriks, started out as a starter, moved to now he's a premier closer and a premier cusser. Okay, we can touch on him briefly, because I think we talked a little bit about Jason Blouse and Jason B in maybe the Birmingham podcast, but he is a guy, as example, in case you think it's very easy for a guy to move from the from the rotation, you're pitching less innings or whatever. You can focus on, whatever. You don't have to have, say, 3 pitches to move in the bullpen. Well, Jason B is a guy who maybe has proven that it isn't exactly just, you don't fall out of bed being able to do it, because he had a tougher year. So rather than go over his year again, because we might have done that already, and I don't know if we touched it on in the earlier podcast, but what's he need to do next year at Charlotte to be a guy that the White Sox could look at, maybe following McClure to the major leagues?
Oh, well, just take up a lot more time as being a reliever. Next year would be the
Okay.
first thing. I don't always enjoy the in season go from starting and then say, hey, go relieve. Is that's totally two different mindsets and two different ways to prepare. So I hope they just tell him this off season, like, just, work on your 2 best pitches.
Mhm.
You're going to be a reliever. You're just going to need to get 3
Yeah.
guys out.
Yeah.
That's what you need to do. Or I guess, or 3 best pitches, because the changeup is not one of his better pitches. But that's what he needs to do, and bring down the walks. That's, I mean, easy enough. Like, make your pitches better and stop walking people, right?
We'll see. We'll see on the south side. It's going to be that easy, Jason. Come on, and we'll finally get the definitive answer on how to pronounce your last name. Okay, here's a weird thing. Among the 6,000 relievers that Charlotte had, because there were no starters, she had to run out. I mean, really, it would be funny to look back on the box scores and just find out what their average number of pitchers per game is. It had to be 6 easy. It might be more than that, because it's just ridiculous. Every game
There
was
were several
essentially
times it was all 9 innings.
yeah,
Was a
9,
different
yeah,
pitcher.
like literally
was,
9. Yeah,
It
unbelievable.
was disgusting.
And you still had guys sometimes who weren't even getting through their inning, which is
Yeah.
got to be really exciting for
Disgusting.
yeah. So but
Ugh.
okay, among the left-handers, because again there were probably 4,000 left-handers this year for the Knights, there are left-handers. It seems like the best left-hander decided to retire before the season ended, and that's Hunter Shriver, which is a setback for the White Sox, and go figure, just the luck of the White Sox. 2 guys that we've sort of followed closely, and one guy who started in the majors this year, another guy who sort of moved up the system with them. Sosa and Pérez are 2 guys, 2 left-handers, the big guys. You'd think they might have a trajectory to the majors, but neither. Sousa just never came back. Pérez did not have a good season. Is there hope for these guys, or is this just also a matter of them still, I don't know, getting AAA innings under them to maybe make that leap, or is it just a crapshoot at this point for those 2?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll keep Souza around in the 40-man, just because his professional career, up until going to the majors for that month or
Yeah.
so that he was up there. I mean, he was striking out batters like quite a bit. And that somehow just went away in the majors. I know, like, I'm not going to say it's all nerves. He's a 2-pitch pitcher. If he can't throw strikes with his slider, then no one's going to swing at it in the majors, unlike they're going to swing at it in the minors. So it's, easy to say, again, with compared to Jason B, like, Bennett Sousa, just throw strikes with your best pitch. But I'm not too sure what kind of the end game is here with lefties in general. I know losing Garrett Crochet for the whole year kind of screwed up the whole lefty bit. I still believe that was the only reason why Tanner Banks was even in the major league bullpen. But they still don't have enough. They're not going to sign enough in free agency, because you would have to actually sign like quite a bit that also have options. And those guys, they're just not around or good. So Bennett Sousa will be sticking around. And he just needs to get, guys to swing and miss at a slider. If he needs to establish the strike zone with his fastball more often, maybe just do first pitch fastball more often, something like that, and then work off of a slider like that. Or somehow find a third pitch in the off season and have it be decent. But for the Andrew Perez part, he was always, he is always younger than Bennett Sousa. He will never be older than Bennett Sousa.
That's why you come to these podcasts.
But yeah, they were kind of going up at the same time. But I think Sousa's slider was just a bit better than Perez's, and that's why that he went up faster. Got more looks, got the month or so in the majors. Though a little note, and I did put it in the piece, his 59 appearances or second most in all of affiliated baseball, just to kind of illustrate, how many times these guys are being used. And I think I can't remember who was also in the top, I think 40. But they had a couple guys up there getting
Yeah.
40 plus appearances, which is not, great for a AAA team. But yeah, I I guess I'm not 100% sure what the Rule 5 draft is
Mhm.
currently. I would have
Right.
to, because there wasn't one last year for no reason. No major league portion. There was a minor league portion,
Right.
but um, yeah, I mean, two lefties. Perez obviously has showed talent in the past, didn't this year. He allowed a lot of hits, allowed a lot of homers in Charlotte, which is, something that just happens, but allowing a lot of homers as a reliever is not a, great way to go about it. But
Yeah.
both of them will be here next year.
Yeah. We could talk about Jake Berger, but we know him from Chicago. He hits somewhat well at the major league level. He doesn't really have a position. He's injured or was injured again. So, I mean, I'm sorry
Yeah.
to Jake. We're going to just sort of put a pin in him because there's not really much to update there, I don't think. And if there is, you can talk over me and tell me what it is, Darren, because we are getting to the exciting portion of the end of the Charlotte Knights podcast, and that is previewing very briefly the Arizona Fall League, because Darren's lucky enough to, on a weekly basis, because let's face it, there's not even any prospects of note from the White Sox playing in this league. Not that it's always the case, but we've had Mike Rodolfo in the past. When Anderson Severino
Jose
was maybe,
Rodriguez.
yeah, exactly. Jose Rodriguez, a slightly big prospect. This year we don't even have that. Don't know what the strategy you're thinking is there. Perhaps at the AAA levels, because all the pitchers are just dead tired. I don't know. But we are going to do just weeklies, and Darren's going to take those on for us. They're going to run on the off day. They play 6 days a week, I think. Take a day off. Um, the as I think Darren put it to me, the most intriguing prospect that the White Sox are sending to the Arizona Fall League is the manager, and that is the whatever heir apparent, or I don't know. They like him a lot. They haven't fired him. He hasn't got himself in any sort of trouble to get himself fired, like in AAA and West Helms. And that is Justin Jirschele, who is usually he's I guess going to maybe stick, I don't know, permanently, or at least for the time being, at Birmingham, given that sort of like the hot minor league affiliate for the White Sox. He is managing the Arizona Fall League team. I don't think there's anything to preview about him. So I'm going to just ask you about one guy, even though I think we've decided that Adam Hackenberg is probably the most intriguing prospect, the guy who's most elusive, who I liked a lot. And then he did have the drug suspension, which apparently was inadvertent, but he also was getting off to a start that was just very strange. And that's Terrell Tatum. But I guess this is your free time. This is your 5 minutes of free time to talk about the Arizona Fall League, Darren, and any money you want to actually make sure we address and preview, because you're going to have to be writing about them. Okay, go.
Yeah, I mean, they sent 7 guys and a manager. But yeah, Adam Hackenberg is the only top 30 guy per MLB pipeline there. He's a catcher. He's okay defensively. The bat could use some work. So that's where we're starting from. Moises Castillo, he was actually called out as a part of being Project Birmingham, which is notable. At the very least, middle infielder, but pretty much Yolbert Sánchez light, just a bunch of singles. But the thing that he does is walk a bit more, or I guess not a bit more, a lot more, but he does get on base at a higher clip. He just kind of redid high A and double A this year, compared to last year when he was with St. Louis. So I don't, like comparing redos as much when you're a prospect. You've been there, done that. Good job for succeeding the second time, I guess. Then yeah, your guy Terrell Tatum.
I'll still claim
He
him.
was doing
Sure.
super well. He walked as many times as he struck out for a large portion, and like they were covering 60% of his plate appearances at one point, between just walks and strikeouts.
Two
And those
outcomes.
did dip in high A before he got popped for amphetamines. But he still showed, a good offensive season overall. It just got cut short, 42 games. I don't know if I want to read a ton into it, but I just know that he does walk a lot and strikes out a lot, and then gotta find, what else he does pretty well. And then the pitchers are just they're sending guys to get innings. on the pitching staff with guys like Lane Ramsey, like just needing more innings from being
Yeah.
injured, and then the other guys just had good seasons. And they're Chase Selesky, Sammy Peralta, Declan Cronin just had good seasons. So they're, keep
Can
playing.
can you just give us a quick idea, Darren? Because I haven't studied this enough. I know it's not just like everybody's organizational all-star team goes to the AFL, of course not. But and the White Sox have a terrible organization, so their guys are not going to measure up. But how do other teams generally look at this? I imagine there's a smattering of approaches, but do more teams do what the White Sox are, which is sort of, I don't want to say random, but it's an eclectic group. Usually with maybe one or two headliners. Um, or is it closer, or do some organizations send maybe a little bit of a merit all-star team to the fall league, or is it just a grab bag?
So I mean, the White Sox had done this up until this year.
Hmm.
We talked about Jose Rodriguez.
Mhm.
Obviously nothing in 2020. I can't really recall 2019 right now, but we know Micah Rodolfo went there. We know from prospects
Yeah,
past, like
Souza
Courtney
went there
Hawkins
maybe
have been there.
2019. Yeah.
Yeah. Like they definitely did that before. But
Mhm.
now with the seasons, like we are AAA ended the what
Wednesday.
Wednesday, September 28th, and this starts October
Yeah.
3rd, which did not used to be the thing.
Yeah.
That the seasons would end so close. So I think what Project Birmingham basically is the AZL or AFL for those prospects that are in high A and double A that they want to see some, higher level, maybe not extra games at the end of the day, just because the seasons on all affiliates are kind of close at this point. But just, against better competition at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And that's what they did. They sent all those guys up to double A. They played for 2 weeks longer time
Yeah.
wise than they would have in Kannapolis and Winston-Salem, and they called it a day. Um,
Yeah.
and they're sending basically, I think, uh, Adam Hackenberg and Castillo and Tatum are the guys that have not played in Charlotte. So they have, gotten at least a couple weeks off before they have to go to
Yeah.
Arizona and play more ball.
Mhm.
I guess in Tatum's case, it's been a couple months, but all the pitchers were in Charlotte, so they are taking a week off and going down to Arizona. So it just kind of seems like they just double A is where they want to see all their prospects for X amount of time, and then in their own controlled environment or controlled enough, and then they'll send them to Arizona where it's still more controlled, but not as much as sending
Mhm.
all the coaches to Birmingham. You can't do that with the AFL. So I I don't know if that's more teams are going to do that
Mhm.
or if other teams do that already. That's just what the White Sox are doing right now, and it seems like in season uh, fast promotions is the way to go for them.
Unbelievably, Darren, we are nearly running out of time. We somehow found a way to spend a half hour plus talking about the Charlotte Knights. Thanks everybody for listening to all of these affiliate wrap ups. He's not going to get away like he did last year. I let him get away. We did no podcast over the in the off season. We will do some. So it is farewell, not goodbye, or goodbye, not farewell. But for now, it is farewell. We'll catch you guys soon, somewhere December or so.